President Biden's immigration policy is being tested with a surge in the number of unaccompanied minors crossing the Mexico-US border. So how will his administration respond? Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rida Fakhri. President Joe Biden is facing a growing crisis at the US-Mexico border with the influx of thousands of unaccompanied minors from Central America, a surge that is on pace to become the largest in the last 20 years, according to the Department of Homeland Security. Over 15,000 unaccompanied children are reportedly being kept at overcrowded facilities along the border, with the administration facing criticism and pressure to address the situation. President Biden has appointed his Vice President, Kamala Harris, to lead the White House's efforts to stem the flow of migrants from Mexico and the Northern Triangle countries, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. On his first day in office, President Biden rescinded a number of Trump's immigration policies and initiated the reform of the immigration system by sending to Congress draft legislation to provide a pathway to U.S. citizenship for an estimated 11 million undocumented aliens living in the U.S. He also eased restrictions for asylum seekers and terminated a policy that required migrants to remain in Mexico while petitioning to enter the United States. Last month, nearly 19,000 family members and 9,400 unaccompanied minors entered the country and were taken into custody by U.S. border officials. Over the last 3 weeks, U.S. government data shows that on average, more than 500 unaccompanied minors have been crossing into the United States every day. One of those asylum seekers who tried to cross into the U.S. after being deported is Marvin Alvarado. We met him in his home in El Zonte, El Salvador. Marvin recounts his experience and tells us why he is willing to make the dangerous trip once again.
Bueno, cuando salí por motivo de, lo primero, ¿verdad?, económico, y lo otro porque tenía miedo por parte de las pandillas y todo eso, ¿verdad? Me sentía como amenazado y eso fue lo que me llevó a tomar la decisión de dejar el país. Íbamos en una balsa, íbamos 16, pasamos en la balsa, pero nomás llegamos al otro lado a correr, lloviendo, mojado. Y de allí a las 4 de la mañana la pudimos pasar. En mi grupo solo iban señores, pero sí yo, bueno, en otros grupos que quedaron ahí, sí habían niños. Habían niños y las mamás sin tener dinero para darles de comer. Ahí a las mujeres ellos las llaman y si tienen niños, ahí los dejan tirados y a ellas se las llevan. Pues me imagino que a abusar de ellas o algo así, porque se las llevaban toda la noche y las regresaban en la mañana. Entonces lo decidimos con mi primo entregarlo a migración, ¿verdad? Y salimos del lugar donde estábamos escondidos para el puesto de ellos. Pero allí fue donde yo conocí las hieleras. Pero ellos solo por 72 horas creo que los tuvieron ahí en las hieleras. Hasta el siguiente día los dieron como tipo papel aluminio. Y con ese ahí en el suelo y solo con el papel aluminio. Pero a la siguiente semana me deportaron y pues triste en el avión. Algunos decían voy alegre porque voy para la casa y que voy contento porque voy a ver a la familia, pero realmente yo no decía nada de eso, no, que triste porque no logré lo que quería y todo lo que sufrí en el camino y no sirvió de nada. Me gustaría intentarlo de nuevo, no tendría miedo, por querer lograr los sueños que uno tiene, ¿verdad? Y mi sueño siempre ha sido estar allá en Estados Unidos. No, si lo intento otra vez más y si me volvieran a mandar, entonces ya hasta allí. hasta ahí ya no lo volviera a intentar.
With the record number of prospective migrants like Marvin arriving at the U.S.'s southern border after week-long journeys, often by foot, the White House is facing growing criticism over immigration, with some criticizing the administration for sending the wrong signals to those seeking asylum by promising a fair and humane policy. The Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, himself a refugee from Cuba, said the southern border is now closed. Meanwhile, 2 Biden administration envoys traveled to Mexico and Guatemala in an effort to develop what they say is an effective and humane plan of action to manage migration. For more on the dire situation on the ground that is pushing so many asylum seekers to attempt the perilous journey from El Salvador to the United States, I'm joined by Meg Gallus. She is the International Rescue Committee's Country Director for El Salvador. Meg Gallus, we just heard Marvin describe to us the desperate situation that drove him to leave El Salvador despite all of the risks he faced. Are you seeing more people make that perilous journey today?
Yes. I think since the borders have opened, we've seen the International Rescue Committee has a information access platform designed to help people find services they need. And so we've seen a huge increase, almost 100% increase in people looking for information about documentation, immigration laws. So the evidence that we're seeing is that people are planning to leave, but also now that the borders are opening again, I think there's been some pent-up demand, and I do think that many more people will be leaving.
But the US has said that the border is now closed, except that they haven't been turning away young, vulnerable children. The head of the Department of Homeland Security said the border is closed. Is that not the message that people in El Salvador are hearing?
I think that it's a complicated situation. I think there's a real belief that with the new administration, things will be better for migrants. And I think that's the message that resonates more because it's what people want to hear. Also, I think that people started these journeys well before the administration started talking about the border being closed. My perception is that at the beginning of the administration, the idea that we were going to have a softer immigration policy from the U.S. Was an inspiration for a lot of people to make the journey. I don't necessarily think that harsh immigration policies keep people from leaving. When people are desperate, when they are hungry, when they're fearing for their lives, when they're fearing for their safety, when they're fearing for their children's future, they make the choice to leave, regardless of what the U.S. administration policies are. And I think that's unchanged. But I do feel that the COVID closing of the borders in Central America and Mexico had pretty clear lockdowns. There was no movement for a long time. And so now that people can move, there's a desire to do so.
But how much of a long shot does it still remain for those people trying to get to the United States to actually get asylum in the US? How many of those attempting this journey are being sent back, and what is being done to help them once they return?
I don't have a sense of the numbers in a way that would be official. I know that in the U.S. is sending 1 or 2 planes full of deportees, so returnees, we say, to El Salvador weekly. And then Mexico is sending 1 or 2 buses weekly. So the IRC is working with the Salvadoran government to receive returnees and help them reintegrate into El Salvador.
What about the legal implications of turning migrants away? I know your organization, the International Rescue Committee, often highlights the fact that international law doesn't allow countries to send asylum seekers back to where they face prosecution and persecution. The international legal norm known as non-refoulement, which dates back to the 1951 UN Refugee Convention. But in practical terms today, with the immigration system in the US being so overwhelmed and law enforcement agencies in countries like El Salvador being overstretched, what legal recourse do people really have? What help are they able to get?
I think that this is actually one of the challenges that the Biden administration has to solve. And I know that it's going to be a difficult process. However, the IRC has made recommendations, I think very wise recommendations, to offer things like asylum processing in country, so that if somebody fears for their life here in El Salvador, they can ask for asylum from El Salvador. And our hope would be that the process would offer wraparound services. So support for safe shelter, support for food, support for their children to continue studying while they're awaiting a case decision. And this would also have to include, a much quicker turnaround, because currently the asylum situation in the U.S., the asylum process can take years. And by the time a decision is made, a family has established themselves in a new life. So the idea of doing asylum in country with the services, because it can't be one or the other. You would have to help the family be safe while they're waiting for a decision, is a solution that we think is viable as an organization, and we would really encourage the Biden administration to consider it.
Meg Gallus, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Now, the crisis at the southern border of the United States is not new. In May 2019, at the height of the immigration surge during the Trump administration, 144,000 people were stopped as they tried to cross the border into the United States. Last month alone, over 100,000 people were stopped trying to cross the border. As of last weekend, more than 15,500 unaccompanied migrant children were in the custody of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and Customs and Border Protection, according to U.S. government data. Over the last month, 11,000 migrant children were apprehended by U.S. border immigration officials. That's nearly double the number of children apprehended in January. Unaccompanied migrant children are being kept in detention facilities on average 130 hours, far longer than the 72 hours allowed by law, according to the Department of Homeland Security. Over 800 unaccompanied minors have been held in detention centers for more than 10 days. For more on the immigration and legal challenges facing the Biden administration, David Leopold, former advisor to President Biden's transitional team and former president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, joins me. So does Ali Noorani, President and CEO of the National Immigration Forum. Thank you both for joining me. David Leopold, despite the numbers that we see, you don't believe that there is a migrant surge at the U.S. southern border. In fact, you say it's all part of the right-wing narrative. Can you deny, though, the U.S. government's own data, especially when it comes to what some are calling the unprecedented increase in unaccompanied minors at the border?
Yeah, I'm not denying, I don't think anyone can deny that there are minors coming in at the border and that there's others that want to come in. But what we have to understand is that rather than a surge, what this is a continuum. These ebbs and flows in migration from Central America have been going on for decades. And in fact, in 2019, we had a much bigger surge, if you will, at the border. Roughly 130,000 people came in. And what we're seeing now is we are seeing unaccompanied minors, but what people have to understand is that the border, for all intents and purposes, is sealed under the United States Title 42, which is with the emergency health code. It's sealed, and all that they're letting in are the children.
And this Title 42 is something that the Biden administration has kept in place. It allows them to turn away migrants immediately, except for those the administration has said were minors, the more vulnerable migrants trying to come in. These are being let in. But Ali Noorani, do you see the situation the same way David does? Is it a continuum, or are we seeing a significant surge? As many as 600 unaccompanied migrants a day are reportedly being detained. It was 500 a day earlier in March. It's significantly higher than the 370 a day average during the 2019 surge, isn't it?
Well, this is, like David said, every year, more or less, for the last couple decades, we've seen this type of flow every spring. And we'll probably see another flow in the fall. I mean, this coincides with, to a large degree, the weather. When it's too hot for people to travel by foot, they will not travel. But what we also need to realize is that the conditions in Central America have continued to deteriorate. Violence is continued to increase. Corruption remains an incredible problem. Poverty remains an incredible problem within the three countries of Central America. And on top of that, you have the two hurricanes that moved through the region in November of 2020. So you take all those factors together, and you have a pent-up demand at the border that exists because of the way the Trump administration really just refused to even let in unaccompanied children. And therefore, you have this type of flow that we're all experiencing now. The Biden administration needs to put in place the infrastructure, the logistics, and the processes so that these children can pursue their cases in a safe and timely way.
Is that what the administration is doing, David? Because the Mexican president, as you know, blamed Biden this week, saying expectations were created that there would be better treatment of migrants. President Biden has pursued what he says is a more fair and humane approach. But is President López Obrador right when he accuses the Biden administration essentially of giving false hopes to migrants from Mexico, from Central America, who want to cross the border?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the Biden administration started off by reversing many of the most cruel policies of the Trump administration. And let's not forget, I mean, I agree with everything Ali said about the conditions in Central America in those countries. And we also have at the northern border the remnants of Trump's disastrous policies of the migrant protection protocols. That's the wait in Mexico policy. I think 70,000 people were backed up in northern Mexico and remain there. We have metering, which was a policy by which people had to wait to apply for asylum, sometimes weeks, months, even years, and that was roughly 20,000 more people. Also, nobody really knows. It's a very gray area as to where the unaccompanied minors that are presenting themselves at the border, where they have been over the last year of the pandemic. It is entirely possible that they were already in northern Mexico. So,
but given this backlog that you mentioned, was it right for the head of the Department of Homeland Security to say just a few days ago to would-be migrants that we are safely processing the children who do come to our border, and we strongly urge, and the message is clear, he said, we strongly urge you not to do so now. Is that sending mixed messages to those migrants?
No, I don't think so. I think that what he's saying is don't come.
Ali, though, the administration is not saying don't come. It's saying don't come now, essentially. Do you see it differently? Is the Biden administration guilty of sending mixed messages, of making the situation worse? Are they implicitly encouraging more people to attempt this journey into the US, knowing that they will be let in and that there will be a more humane system in place under Biden?
Well, there's two things here. Number one, President Biden, I believe it was late last week, said in an interview with ABC News, don't come, full stop. So I don't know if you can make a much more clear statement to folks as the president of the United States other than to say don't come. But then the second thing, and this is actually probably the most vexing factor that we have to contend with, is that smugglers, as of the day after the election, have been selling a lie to desperate Central American families that the border is open. And they've been selling that lie for $6,000 to $10,000 a pop. And people are in such desperate situations that they are spending up to 3 years of their salary to try to get to the border based on this lie. So one of the things that I think that the Biden administration should do, along with the López Obrador administration in Mexico, is to collaborate of how they are disrupting these cartels and human smuggling networks so that we can stop people from selling this lie, because that's what's really putting people in this incredibly unsafe situation.
And David, let me ask you, as an immigration lawyer, many children having been in custody for more than double the legal detention limit under US law, at least 5,000 apparently have been kept for over 72 hours, which is the legal limit under which they have to be transferred to the custody of US health officials. What is happening to these children and to the hundreds who were separated from their parents under Trump?
Well, there's no question that it's a very difficult situation, which has to be remedied and which I believe will be remedied by the administration. But let's think about this. These children were in northern Mexico. What's worse, to send them back to northern Mexico into the arms of the cartels, into the squalor and danger in which they were living and subjected to before? My hope, and I think the hope of the administration and advocates, is that the government will be able, the Biden administration will be able to move these children into proper custody out of the detention centers or the shelters, into Office of Refugee Resettlement Custodies, and into either reuniting with family members here. Many of them have family members here, or into proper temporary situations. Now, remember, what will happen to those children is that then they will be given a chance, in most cases, for an asylum hearing. And let's not forget that part of the problem here, part of the situation was caused by the Trump administration's complete gutting of the asylum system, complete dismantling, and disrespect for the law itself.
What about the long-term solutions, though, David? As someone who's advised the Biden transition team, I mean, you look at the situation, and the kinds of people coming in through the border are no longer the same types of people that came in 10, 20 years ago, mostly single men from Mexico. It's now families and children, teenagers, mostly from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Now, these are all countries in a region where the United States has had a long and dubious history of intervention and support for right-wing dictators. For many in the region, so much of this instability and insecurity that is forcing so many of them to leave is seen as a direct result of decades of corrupt leaderships, backed and propped up by the United States government. Is that part of the problem, this legacy of US policy, and is that likely to change under the Biden administration?
Well, look, regardless of how we got here, there is an untenable, and that's a mild word, situation in the Northern Triangle countries in Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. And these children, their families, they're fleeing horrific violence. They're fleeing gang violence. They're fleeing corruption. And on top of that, they've had hurricanes and other disasters down there. So that speaks to the root causes. The United States, for many of the reasons you just mentioned, and for other reasons, because we do want to protect the hemisphere. This is part of our neighborhood. We do need to get to the root causes of what's causing the migration. And I think that's what is so encouraging, that at least I see in the Biden administration's first days in office, is that they are focusing on the long-term solution, which is really to get to the root causes.
Ali Noorani, just finally to you, what is for you the long-term solution when it comes to dealing with the root causes? Because some in Congress are now calling for some kind of a 21st century Marshall Plan for Central America to stop people fleeing because they cannot find safety or opportunity in some of these countries. Should the US be investing in social programs? Is that the right approach? Can it work? Will it be enough to undo decades of neglect, if not outright support for the wrong governments in the region?
So after the 2014 unaccompanied children crisis that we saw, that really, I think, caught the Obama administration's attention, much less the foreign policy establishment's attention, you saw an infusion of financial and political capital in the region. In fact, then Vice President Biden, he played the role that Vice President Harris will be playing, of really engaging the diplomatic efforts to strengthen these countries. So in Honduras, for example, there was a commitment to an effort to purge the Honduran National Police of corruption. Thousands of police officers were removed from their jobs from the top to the bottom in order to root out corruption. Over the course of the Trump administration, a lot of that funding was put at risk. In fact, it was used as leverage to force Central American countries to clamp down on migration. And what then happened, what that then allowed is really an emergence of a different type of corruption within Central American countries. I mean, in fact, the current sitting president of Honduras, his brother is being investigated for drug trafficking here in the U.S. And there are some people who think that the president himself could end up being brought into that investigation. So moving forward, we think that the $4 billion over 4 years investment or commitment by the Biden administration in this region is a good start. But ultimately, this is a complicated problem that requires a complicated set of solutions that, yes, begin here in the U.S. on our side of the border, touch and dig into the issues in Mexico, but ultimately address poverty, corruption, violence and climate change in Central America.
$4 billion, as you say, earmarked for Central America that now is likely to be based on good governance and other measures as well. Ali Nourani and David Leopold, great to have you both. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And so the Biden administration is having to grapple with the legacy of decades of controversial U.S. foreign policy in Central America. Policies that promoted Washington's ideology, supported right-wing military dictatorships, and fought left-leaning governments at heavy social, economic, and human costs. Today's corruption, violence, insecurity, and economic mismanagement plaguing a number of Central American countries whose youth are trying to seek safety and opportunities in the United States cannot be seen in isolation. As it attempts to humanize its immigration policy, the US will also have to recalibrate its policies to address the root causes of immigration and its legacy in Central America. That's all from me, Rida Fakhri, from the entire team in Washington. Thanks for watching. See you next time.